Hey kids, welcome to Unit 2, Lesson 2, No Argument Constructors, exercise number 7. We have a choose your own adventure. I'm going to switch it up a little. I don't sports ball very much, but I do love poetry. We're going to go ahead and do C, the poem class. A poet wants to compile some of their work in a book, and they need help creating a program to manage their poetry. To do number 1, in the poem class, we're going to declare a private instance variable named title and num lines for the title and poem and the number of lines in the poem. To do number 2, we're going to write a no argument constructor, and that's going to assign default values to the instance variables, such as new poem for the title of a poem and 1 for the number of lines in a poem. In our third, we're going to go into the main method here and instantiate a poem object. Then we're going to print the constructor and the values assigned to that instance variable for the poem object. That doesn't sound too bad. Let's look at our code here. Nothing in our poem runner method. In poem, looks like we have our class, space to write our instance variables and no argument constructor. We have a get method. We haven't talked about this. This looks like it's getting the title. Just want you to notice how this is public. And then we have a get num of lines, also public. I just want you to notice this. We're going to explain this in a couple lessons, but this is actually a pretty important concept in Java, and this is going to help us access those private instance variables outside the class. More on that later. Let's go ahead and declare some private instance variables. Right below our class signature, we're going to declare the instance variables. How do we do that? We need our access modifier. There are two types, public for outside the class, private for inside the class. Next, we need a data type. Remember, we have 4, int, double, string, and boolean. This looks like it's going to be a word, so we're going to use a string. Remember, S is capital, and this is going to be called title. Don't forget your semicolon. Our next one, also going to be private. It is going to be an int because I don't think we can have 12.3 pages. And this is going to be called num lines. These are our attributes or describe our object. Once we do that, we can use this to create a blueprint for an object with some default values. And that's what we're going to do next. Write a no argument constructor to assign some default values. We're going to come down here and write it after our instance variables. The no argument constructor does have a specific anatomy we have to follow. First, we need to write the accessor method. We want this to be accessed outside of the class. So that's going to be public. Next, whatever the name of the class, that's what we have to name our constructor. Our class is poem. That means our constructor name is poem. This is a no argument, meaning there are no parameters. So we're just going to put some empty parentheses for now. We do need some curly cues here. This is going to close my constructor. And now inside here, we can assign some values to those instance variables. Why would we need to do that? We've been creating blueprints this entire class. This is just helping us start to learn how to create our own versions of those blueprints. And I think the next lesson we're going to be able to modify them as well. We haven't talked much about assigning values to variables here. There is a lesson coming up that's going to deal with a lot of that. For now, just know that you take the name of the variable, the equal operator, and then whatever we want to assign it to. That means our variable that we had, title, we're just going to create one, and they want us to call it new poem. Do not forget your semicolon afterwards. Same thing with num of lines. How many number of lines we need? Well, they just want us to put 1, so we will, and a semicolon. Again, these should have the same name. your constructor and your instance variable. We're just assigning a value to it here when we call it. Now that we've done that, we have to go over and instantiate and call this object. How do we do that? Same way we've been creating objects. It is from the poem class, we'll just call it a roads, and it's going to equal a new, and this is the part where we've been writing a no argument constructor for the whole class. Just like when we've been calling the painter, we've actually been calling a no argument constructor. That set our painter object at 0, 0, facing east with no paint. So now we are just going to call that poem constructor we just created. Did it have any arguments? No. So we do the same signature. Don't forget your semicolon. Now we have to print off the constructor for the poem. Let's go down here and print off constructor of the program. And to get that, we're going to come down here and copy this. This again is just helping us print. This isn't on the exam, so we're not going to talk too much about this. Remember, we have to change the object. The object was a roads. Don't forget your semicolon. Now we have to get the individual variables. So print the values assigned to the instance variable. Give ourselves a little room. We've talked a little bit about print statements. That's system.out.println. Put our semicolon. I want to print the title, so we're going to put title, little space. We are going to concatenate, just like we've called methods before. We go down to our poem class here. I can call this getTitle method. How do I do that? I need the object dot modifier and then that getTitle method. I'm going to do the same thing for the number of lines. I'm going to put number of lines. We're going to concatenate. It's going to be roads. And what method are we getting? It is going to be this getNum of lines. We can just copy it right there. Let's actually get the parentheses too. Back here, if we paste it in. Now when I hit run, I should get the constructors to print off, which is title and num of lines, and the values I assigned. Get title, new poem, and 1. Well, let's see if I'm right. And there you go. I got my constructor to print off, and the values I assigned to the instance variable is a default. Pretty neat. There's a couple key ideas in this lesson. The first is the constructor and what it is. If you've been following these videos, I actually covered this early on, and we've been talking about it a little here and there. And a constructor is just the blueprint that we're creating an object or instantiating an object with. We've been doing this all throughout this course already. If you think of our painter, when we instantiate an object, we instantiate it from the class, the painter class. Then we had the name, equal, new, and so far we've been just putting the class name again with some parentheses. But that second painter is actually a constructor we didn't see. If you see here, it was a no argument constructor that had a location of 0, 0 for x and y facing east with 0 paint. And whenever we instantiate a new object, oh, that's where the painter was created. So that was a no argument constructor. That's a great reason why we write defaults. When we're creating an object, we can just have some default values we always know we start with. What are the components of that constructor? Well, the first is the access modifier. We want it to be public because we want it to be able to be accessed outside of the class. Next, we write the name of the class. It should be the same name spelled the same way of the class. After that, we're leaving empty parentheses because there's no parameters yet. This is a no argument constructor. And then we put some curly cues after that. This entire line makes up our constructor signature. Inside those curly braces, we're going to put those default values. These have to be the same thing as our instance variables. If our instance variables was xLocation, then that's what we have to use. We don't invent new variable names here. In our painter object, those were set to 0, 0 with the direction east and remaining paint of 0. All of that makes up my constructor, my blueprint for my object. Whenever I want to build a painter object and I instantiate a new one, it has these values. So these instance variables or attributes are describing how my blueprint or object is made. This is how these are all tying in together. But hopefully this lesson helped you understand no argument constructors a little better. As always, kids, if you have any questions, come see me. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next video. See you later, kids. Bye. Bye.